Greetings friends, in this video I'm going to discuss how open borders means national suicide and environmental destruction. But to understand how we got to the place where we would have open borders, we have to understand how we took the sacred out of everything in our life, in our countries, and in the belief of our peoples and the stories which bind us together. We took the sacred out of everything. Nothing is sacred in the modern capitalist society. We turned all the land into real estate. Maybe some land could be real estate, but everything was stamped with a price tag, which can fluctuate according to the markets. So when I was growing up, one of my good friends, his parents flipped houses and they moved numerous times. They must have moved at least 5 or 6 times in the 8 or 9 years that I was good friends with him, or even longer than that. But they made money from doing it, and he was an only child. They were great people, by the way, but I thought was so different from my own experience because I always lived in the same house growing up in that neighborhood, and you get to know people on your street. Now it was the suburbs, so you're still disconnected to some extent from your neighbors and the land, but it's at least we were in that neighborhood. That neighborhood meant something. It meant something at least. But for other people, it doesn't matter. Not only to live in a house and be close to the ground where in the permitting seasons you can grow things or go outside and throw a ball around, let your cat or dog outside and basically have something which reminded us of the old way of life. Oh, no. Nowadays, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter about the community. I mean, of course, sometimes people have to flee risky communities. That's true, of course. That's the other side of the coin. But there is this attitude that was already there before, that it didn't matter. We're all just individuals in a capitalist society. We can go anywhere, we can go to any city, make money there, buy land, sell land, acquire assets, sell assets, move your kid to this school, that school. Doesn't matter. Actually, my dad grew up in different schools in Canada and in the United States. I don't think it helped him forming a solid group of friends as a young person, constantly moving around. If you grow up as a boomer in that sort of setting, then maybe I can see why they would have this attitude that the whole country could become real estate that you could open to the rest of the world, and therefore lead this into open borders. The concept of real estate takes over all land. If you have this approach to living, then there's not going to be any family history associated with any particular piece of land. Increasingly, people aren't going to live on any land at all as they live in multi-story buildings, even on the edge of the city, where they could live closer to the ground because it would be cheaper to rent in a house. People still prefer, in many cases, to live in tall apartment blocks or tall condos. They have no inclination anymore, or they didn't have it, or it's been snuffed out, or they came from a culture that they didn't have that relation to the natural world. They're more comfortable in that built-up complex, like they go outside to the store and they'll drive on the highway, but they'll otherwise have no real connection with that land. It won't mean much to them, in other words. They could just as well be in Mexico or Saudi Arabia. In the past, a town or city had an identity. People identified with their community. It gave them a sense of dignity. It gave them a sense of belonging. Today, that's gone. There's no dignity, and there's really no identity in the city where you live. At least, increasingly, that's the case. Look at southern Ontario, or even most of Ontario on Google Street View. Look at the towns. They all look like the same suburbs. You can barely tell one apart from another, and you can't, really. Just looking at the way streets are. They're all planned exactly the same. It's just bland. It's completely devoid. Architecture reflects this total lack of the sacred in our experience. So these are things, our approach to the built world, and our lack of consideration as to what constitutes a community. Why would we want a community to persist over time? These are some of the foundational currents which lead to open borders. We don't have any conception of the nation anymore. We in Canada, particularly, have accepted an openness to the world as like our identity. Anglos in general really lost their whole spirit. Like they stopped having kids, they stopped believing in God and belonging to Christian communities and going to churches, apart from historical developments of the schism, of course. But even in Protestants or Roman Catholic circles, it was good to belong to a traditional way of living that bound your community together and gave you at least some objective morality to live by, and kept your people strong in the face of threats. Now, our people is diminished. What is left of the Anglo people? What is left of the nations which were the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Britain? These are unrecognizable to how they even were 40 years ago, let alone a century ago. Completely unrecognizable. And this is because largely of open borders. There's technological reasons, there's other things, but how can you have open borders and a nation? The two cannot coexist. They're like mutually exclusive concepts, because by having a nation, you have a group of people, and that people has a land on which they live. Even if it's a nomadic people, they have a certain terrain over which they tend to come by. If you have no borders, you have no boundaries, then how are you even to define or understand what your people is? You couldn't maintain their identity anymore. And therefore, if you can't maintain their identity, how can you maintain cultural practices? How can you maintain any shared morality? You can't. You can only surrender and submit to outside forces which are stronger than you. It's no different than opening the door to your house and letting all the warmth of your house go out into the cold air, and then anyone on the street could come in. What kind of a world do we live in where we could do that now? And yet that's what we've been doing in the West. We live in cultures of national suicide. So when I met this socialist pamphleteer in Queen's Park the other day with my friend, we spoke with him for 5 or 10 minutes. And the dialogue was respectful and intelligent, and he was concerned about climate change. Now, we didn't really get into climate change. There's no point in having a sharp disagreement right away at the beginning of the conversation. That's not going to be productive, although I am skeptical of climate change. I did question, because he was talking about these fires going on in Canada, these forest fires. And I was saying, well, how do we know this is not something that happens over history? And he says, well, it does, but it's getting worse now. And I said, well, okay, but we didn't ultimately pursue that line of dialogue. There's no point in just arguing over something with that. Why don't you approach a leftist, and this guy's being respectful, why don't you approach him more diagonally? This was fruitful, I think, because we were both concerned about the green belt, which is around the Greater Toronto Area, a region where you're not supposed to build suburbs, you're not supposed to really develop the environment. It's got forests and rivers and meadows and wildlife. It's nice, right? At least we have that. This is something that the left, at least as far as I know, would agree with. We should conserve this. But he also let on that he supports open borders. I forget how that was mentioned, but. And this guy's a white guy. He's not too much different in age than us. He's at least in his 30s. We pointed out that this mass immigration is obviously causing a huge strain on the environment from the pressure to build housing, from the increased cars on the road, from the increased consumption of food and energy and every other material imaginable. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people coming into the country every year. Hundreds of thousands, and then most of them going into the major cities in the country. So granted, it's not like the wilderness is experiencing all of this influx, but the areas around the major cities, and the major cities really define our countries. Like, that is the heart of our countries. We want to have some environment around our major cities that we enjoy, that we can say has been respected and has beauty and has value in itself apart from any economic function. We have something that is still sacred, maybe if that's not the right word in our modern times, but there's something beyond mere utilitarian function. And this is why it's important to have environmental conservation. around our urban areas. But mass immigration is not compatible with that. There's constant pressure to build and build and build, and the condo developers are as rapacious as ever. And they're always eager to come in there. But we didn't really get a clear answer from the socialist guy, because he understood that maybe this is contributing, but we have to unite against the far right. I said, well, what unites us all? What ties us together in this country? And he said, we're all workers. That just wasn't a very compelling answer to me. There's a lot of bums who live on welfare. There's a lot of people who don't work that hard as others and get by. So why would that really unite us? And then there's different kinds of work, and sure, a lot of us are workers in the sense that, yeah, we have to do the 9 to 5 to get by, and the system is not very nice to us. So yeah, in some sense, it very loosely binds us. But we're still extremely different from each other, with different cultures, different worldviews. We haven't shown that we can coexist successfully in a civilization that can continue. In summary, open borders is the same thing as destroying your nation, because your nation is a group of people and it includes a specified place where they live. So you can't have that with mass immigration, and the left is okay with that because the left doesn't care about the nation. They don't care about the country. They're basically traitors to their peoples, or some of them are brainwashed to think that their peoples are evil. But then some of them sincerely hate their own peoples. So that's just the left being the left. But the tension that they have to maintain is that they're supposed to conserve the environment, but they're encouraging one of the major factors, if not the main factor, that is putting strain on the environment. What do you think is boosting our population? It's all immigration at this point. They want to focus on something more abstract, like climate change, that you can't see directly. You can't explain 100%, oh, well, this day is caused by the temperature here is caused by climate change. It's vague, it's just more abstract. It's more useful for the globalist program of imposing taxation, more bureaucratic regulations, etc., to bring about that one world government, that Babylon system. They're all right to stress that, but then something that we can directly see, like the green belt outside our cities, oh well, we have to sacrifice that to open borders. So you see, there's so many contradictions inherent in the left. There's so many contradictions that they have to maintain somehow in their fractured psyches. The same way vegans have to maintain that field mice die by the thousands for the soy fields that make all their soy milk that they like to drink and their soy goods. Hasta luego, amigos. Got no one else to blame. We forgot about the flame, and somehow this land we try to claim. I don't recognize that chance the name. Don't recognize that chance the name. Canadian economic zone, and the Canucks store is wide open. Money, money, print, 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 print. More money, money. Diversity's our strength. You gotta swim the full length. You gotta swim the full length. And you said diversity's our strength. Canada's an economic zone. The door is wide open. Hey everybody, welcome to our home. But it's just an economic zone. Have you heard the news? We're gonna give you the news.